Some losses are buried in silence, but some truths come back. Singing softly from the back of a moving bus, a father thought his twin daughters were dead. 3 years later, he saw them again singing on a city bus, their voices hauntingly familiar. But this wasn't a reunion. It was a beginning of heartbreak, of revelation, and of a truth that didn't just break his heart. It shattered the life he thought he knew. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now take a deep breath, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. It was never about the child, not really. That's what I tell myself, even now, with the smoke long gone and the wind no longer clawing at the roof each night. It wasn't mercy, it wasn't duty, it wasn't even loneliness. It was something more quiet than all of those. More stubborn too. A refusal, maybe. A refusal to let the world tell me I had nothing left to give. The storm that morning didn't come with thunder or light, it arrived with a taste of ash in the air. The kind that settled behind your teeth and made every breath feel like the end of something. I had just set the kettle on when I heard it. 3 knocks, too soft to be fear, too steady to be a mistake. I knew the sound of someone with nothing left but a question they were too tired to ask. I opened the door slowly, not from caution, but because I still moved with a limp that had never healed right. He was standing there, soaked to the bone, a man grayed at the edges by something that wasn't just rain. In his arms, wrapped in a wool blanket that had seen better years, was a child. Small, still, barely breathing, if I'm honest. I didn't ask his name, didn't ask the babies either. There's a silence some people carry that tells you more than questions ever could. I only stepped aside and let them in. Not as an invitation, but as a pause in the cold. He didn't sit, not at first. Just stood there dripping on my floorboards, watching me as if waiting for the door to close again. I didn't close it. I went back to the stove, poured 2 cups of tea, and placed one near the chair by the fire. He took it like a man who hadn't been offered kindness in a long time. The baby whimpered once, not crying, just a sound like wind slipping under a door. I didn't need to ask what happened. The way he looked at the child told me everything. He hadn't come to give the boy away, he'd come because he had nothing left, not even the strength to hold on to the last thing that mattered. And I hadn't held anything that mattered in a very long time. The baby was warm, too warm, eyes dull from hunger or fever or both. I moved with the old knowledge, the kind I never forgot no matter how many years passed since they'd let me touch a patient. My hands remembered what my name had been stripped of. He didn't speak, just watched me prepare a bottle with milk warmed from the stove, his breath shallow, his shoulders coiled tight as if waiting for me to curse him, to shove the child back into his arms and send them both into the storm. But I didn't. I held the child close, fed him slow, felt something ancient stir beneath my ribs when he latched on and sighed. That night, I left the door unlocked. Not out of trust, God knows I didn't trust Easy anymore, but because part of me hoped he'd stay. Or maybe because I was afraid he wouldn't. He didn't sleep, not really. Sat near the fire all night, eyes open, like a man afraid dreams would accuse him. I tended the child through the night without speaking. There's something holy about tending to someone too small to sin. It quiets the grief, makes it patient. By morning, the storm had passed. The frost glinted at the edge of the fields like silver wounds healing over. I stepped out to check the hives with the child strapped to my chest. He followed without being asked. I didn't wait for an explanation. Some things, if said too soon, shatter instead of settling. The bees were hungry. The ground was thawing. And the town had started whispering again. I could feel it in the way the wind carried the scent of burned wood. In the way Evelyn Pike's shutters opened just enough to see, but not enough to be seen. It was never about the child. But the child is what made the world decide it had something new to fear about me. The man stayed, not in the way a neighbor stays warm, expectant, ready to split chores and share harvest. He stayed the way guilt stays, quiet, watchful. Always halfway through the door, even when he's sitting right in front of you. He didn't ask for a room, didn't ask for a favor, Just kept carrying that child as if letting go might unmake the only thing left tethering him to this world. I didn't ask questions. Not because I wasn't curious, God knows curiosity was the only real hunger left in me most days, but because I knew too well how it felt to have your past turned into a weapon. People around here weren't gentle with truth. They shaped it into knives and handed them out like bread. The child, whose name I still didn't know, began to warm. His cries were weak but steady. That was enough for me. I had saved weaker things before. The man he watched me with that same expression, like he'd seen mercy before but never trusted it to last. Sometimes I caught him staring at the fields like they'd speak answers to him. But the earth only speaks to those who work it. 3 days passed like that. The weather turned sharp again, brittle with frost and wind. I split wood in the morning while the man held the child near the stove. He tried to help once, took up the axe like it remembered his hand. But the way he swung it was too careful, like someone who didn't trust his strength anymore. After 3 logs, he stopped, muttered something I didn't catch, and sat back down inside. I didn't push him. I just stacked the wood higher and made enough stew for 2 bowls. He never finished his. On the 4th day, the knock came again, but not from the storm this time. From Evelyn Pike's boy, barely 16 and already twisted into the same crooked spine as his mother. He stood on my porch with boots too clean and words too rehearsed. "Saw smoke," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Town's wondering who you got up here. Folks saying they seen a man." I didn't answer, just stared long enough for his feet to shuffle back half a step. He didn't have his mother's poison yet, but it was blooming. I saw it in the way his mouth twisted when he thought I wasn't watching. "Folks don't like secrets," he added. "Then don't come near them," I thought. But I only nodded once and closed the door. That night, the man finally spoke. "They'll come," he said, voice like a stone dropped into a dry well. "Sooner or later. For me, maybe for him." I didn't look up from the embroidery I'd taken to stitching. I never liked wasting my hands. "Who are they?" He hesitated. Not like someone deciding whether to lie, but like someone who didn't know where truth began anymore. People who think they're owed something, who want what can't be returned. I waited. He didn't offer more, so I didn't ask. Instead, I poured him another cup of tea and told him the fence would need mending in the morning. The next day, he was up before me. I found him outside, shoulders bent against the wind, hammering nails with a kind of desperation I recognized. The kind that hopes if you fix enough things on the outside, you'll forget what's broken underneath. I didn't interrupt. We worked side by side until our hands ached and the fence stood straight again, no longer leaning like a drunk against the sky. That night, I asked him his name. He flinched, just slightly. Then, Caleb. It didn't suit him. Too clean, too soft. But I said nothing. Names are rarely chosen. They're given often by people who never really knew us. I didn't tell him mine. The child he had begun to smile, just faintly. It wasn't much. A twitch at the corners. A recognition of something warm, maybe. I fed him goat's milk mixed with crushed grain, the way my grandmother had taught me long ago. He had no teeth yet, but he suckled like he was trying to grow them just to fight. I liked that about him. But the world was tightening its grip again. I felt it in the way the birds quieted earlier each evening. In the footprints I found near the back fence that weren't mine or Caleb's. In the silence from town, not angry yet, but cold. Cold like judgment. Cold like waiting. Caleb stopped going outside. He held the child close and stared at the fire like it might burn answers into his chest. I tried once to ask him what he had done. He only shook his head. "You don't want to know," he said. I didn't press. I already knew the shape of a man running from something he couldn't outrun. But it wasn't him I feared. It was the town. Places like this don't forgive. They remember everything, every wrong, every rumor, every broken oath. And they never forget a woman who doesn't bend, even after all these years. They still whispered my name in church, even when I hadn't stepped foot in one since the accident. They still remembered the boy who died in my arms, the son of the mayor's cousin. They still remembered how I touched his face and whispered he wouldn't feel a thing, even as his chest heaved like a dying animal's. They said I was too calm, too cold, too much. They had always been looking for a reason to hate me again, and now they had one. On the 7th day, a note appeared nailed to the gate. Send him out, before we come in. There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. I recognized the handwriting. Evelyn Pike. Her script hadn't changed in 30 years. Caleb saw the note, said nothing, burned it in the stove without a word. I wanted to ask what they thought he'd done, but something inside me already knew the answer wouldn't matter. The town never needed proof, just a whisper loud enough to catch wind. That night, I locked the door for the first time in years. Not to keep Caleb out, but to keep the rest of them from walking in like they owned what wasn't theirs. The day after the note, I went to the orchard. Not because I needed apples, the last of them had rotted weeks ago in the cellar, but because the trees were the only things that remembered me without blame. They didn't speak my name in hushed tones. They didn't flinch when I walked past. They didn't ask why I was still alive when others weren't. The air had shifted, thinner now, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. The sky above hung heavy with clouds, but no rain came. Just that same strange stillness I'd come to recognize over the years, the quiet that settled right before the town decided to act. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat by the stove most nights, the child nestled against his chest, both of them motionless save for the rise and fall of breath. Sometimes I thought he was praying, but his lips didn't move. Other times I thought he was listening, but the silence had nothing to say. I hadn't told him what the town was capable of. Not truly. They didn't come with torches. They came with silence and poison. They came with rumors whispered into the ears of cowards. They came with empty casseroles and forced smiles, with church bells that rang louder when you didn't show up. And when they were ready, truly ready, they came with shovels. Not to bury you, to dig up everything you thought you had buried. That morning, I found the first sign. One of the goats was gone. No trail, no blood. Just the gate swinging open, and a single footprint in the mud, small, likely Evelyn's boy again. Too young to do damage, too stupid to do anything but follow orders. I didn't tell Caleb. Instead, I doubled the feed for the hens, checked the cellar locks, and sharpened the old scythe I'd left hanging above the pantry door. I hadn't held it since the accident. The blade had rusted in spots, but the weight in my hand still felt familiar. Not like violence, like memory. That night, Caleb asked me something unexpected. Why are you helping us? I didn't look up. I was mixing a paste for the baby's rash crushed mint. Beeswax, lavender oil. I'd always trusted plants more than people, because I still remember what it's like to be unhelped. He stared at the fire again. Did they ever come for you? He asked. I paused. Then I nodded. Once. When? After the child died, I said. He didn't flinch, just waited. I had never said it out loud before. Not in full. They said I waited too long, that I didn't scream soon enough, that no woman should be that calm while a boy dies in her arms. He was sick? I nodded. Too sick to save, but they needed someone to blame. What did they do? They buried the boy. Then they buried me. I let the silence stretch. They didn't come with pitchforks, I said. They just stopped coming. No one brought bread. No one bought honey. One night, someone killed all the chickens. Another night, someone set fire to the shed. And you stayed? There was nowhere else. Caleb said nothing. Just looked down at the child in his arms. He was growing stronger. His cheeks had color again. His legs kicked when hungry. His tiny fists gripped my sleeve whenever I lifted him from the cot. Life had begun returning in layers. Not loudly, but undeniably. Sometimes I wondered if that's why the town had grown restless again. They could smell life being nursed in a house they thought was meant to stay hollow. They came again the next day. Not Evelyn this time, not her boy. This time it was Thomas Green, the sheriff, tall, crooked-backed, hat in hand like a man pretending kindness while measuring where to drive the first nail. He didn't knock, just stood near the fence like a man trying not to look like a thief. He's here, isn't he? He asked. I didn't move from the porch, just wiped my hands on my apron. Who? You know who. I stared past him, toward the edge of the woods. You planning to come in and look? He shifted, uncomfortable. Not because he was afraid of me, he wasn't, but because he didn't know what line he was about to cross. Look, I don't want trouble. Good. Because I haven't invited any. There's talk. There always is. They say he's dangerous. That the baby ain't his. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. They also say I turned my husband into fertilizer. You want to check the soil too? His jaw tightened. He didn't like being mocked, but he knew he couldn't push harder without proof. And he had none. Just whispers. I'll be back, he said. I'll be here. He turned and walked away, slower than he arrived. That night, I moved the cot closer to my bed. I placed the child down after warming his milk, then pulled the old iron latch across the front door. The windows were already bolted, the cellar hatch double-chained. Caleb watched me do it all without a word. You should go, I said finally. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. I won't tell them, I won't point. But if you stay, they'll find a way. His face hardened. And the boy? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He already knew I wouldn't give him up. That's what frightened him most, I think. I'm not running again, he said. I didn't argue. I just laid out an extra blanket and tucked the scythe beneath the bed. That night, the wind howled like it hadn't in weeks. The roof creaked with the weight of it. The baby cried once, then fell silent as I pressed him close to my chest, his tiny heartbeat echoing against mine like a second chance I hadn't asked for. Somewhere in the dark beyond the orchard, a dog barked once. Then nothing. Just the sound of breathing. Just the weight of waiting by the time the first window was shattered. I was already awake. It didn't come with shouting. No torches, no warning, just a stone, thrown fast and sure through the back kitchen pane, landing in a scatter of glass across the floor I had just scrubbed the night before. It didn't hit anyone, didn't carry a note. Just cold, quiet violence. The kind that doesn't bother with messages because the message is already everywhere. Caleb was the first to move, rising from the stool like a man coming out of a long sleep. The baby stirred but didn't cry. He'd grown used to the hush we all moved in, the tension wrapped around the house like a second roof. I picked up the stone. It was smooth, river stone, likely from the creek near town. Not something you'd find in these fields. Someone had brought it with purpose. Someone had made a choice. Outside, the night returned to stillness. Whoever it was had already gone. I didn't call for help. I knew better. Help had long ago become a currency I couldn't afford. Instead, I swept the glass into a pan and boarded the window with leftover lumber from the barn roof. Caleb watched, wordless again. His silence was never passive. It was the silence of someone who didn't trust his voice to hold together. That morning, I found the goat's collar nailed to the orchard gate. No blood. Just the collar, and one of its bells still attached, tinkling in the wind like a cruel joke. I didn't touch it. Just stared until the numbness settled behind my ribs. Then went back inside and fed the baby oatmeal with mashed pears. He was growing quickly now, cheeks full, fingers strong. He held my thumb when I fed him, gripping as if to say, I'm still here. I still want to be here. And that was enough. Caleb began asking to help again. Not in words, she never volunteered with his mouth but with his body. He started bringing in wood, mending fence posts, checking traps. I let him. It gave him shape and it gave me breath. I'd spent too many years doing everything alone. He didn't tell me much, but over time, little things escaped. He said the baby wasn't his by blood, but his by choice. He said the baby's mother had died in childbirth. That much I believed. His eyes told the truth long before his mouth did. He said the child had been promised to another family. A rich one. A powerful one. The kind who saw children not as souls but as investments. They wanted him for what he would become, he said. Not for what he was. I didn't ask for names. He didn't offer them. There were some truths that came with weights too heavy to lift all at once. But something changed after that night. Caleb began sleeping with one eye open. I caught him checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. He moved the baby's cot closer to his bed. When I asked him, softly, whether he thought they'd really come this far to take the child, he didn't answer. He just stared out the window and said, "They already have." I knew that kind of fear. It moves in slow patterns. It eats your food, sours your dreams, settles into your bones until even peace tastes like danger. I had lived with it for years. When I buried my husband in accident, the town never forgave me, for there were whispers that I had pushed him, that I had let him fall, that I had stood over his crumpled body with something like relief in my face. None of it was true, but truth doesn't survive in places that need scapegoats. The town never forgot the boy who died in my care, never forgot the fire in the shed, never forgot the woman who didn't cry at church. They were never going to forget Caleb either, or the child, or what they thought he represented. On the sixth night, someone painted a red X on my barn door. I scrubbed it off with vinegar and soap, but the outline remained faint, haunting, like a scar that wouldn't close. Caleb saw it too. He didn't speak of it, but he worked harder that day. Sharpened tools, patched the cellar walls, repaired the hinges on the root cellar like a man preparing for siege. The baby began crawling that week. Small, slow movements, reaching forward with all the determination in the world. I laid a quilt down by the stove and watched him push and tumble across it, mouth open in quiet wonder, life blooming despite it all. It hurt to watch, not because it was painful, but because it reminded me what I had lost. I had once held something like that too, a child not born from me, but placed into my arms by a sister who trusted me more than her own husband. He didn't survive the fever. I had held him while he burned, whispering lullabies in a language neither of us fully remembered. When he died, I buried him under the apple tree. And when the town found out, they asked why I hadn't called for the doctor. I had, but he never came. That was when the silences began. The polite rejections, the empty chairs, the burnt letters, the milk left to sour on my porch. That was when I learned a woman could be erased not with violence but with absence. So I understood what Caleb was trying to protect. It wasn't just the child. It was the right to keep something fragile from being devoured by people who had forgotten how to love anything they couldn't control. By the seventh night, I had stopped sleeping entirely. Each creak of the wood, each gust of wind, each owl cry was a warning. I began keeping the scythe closer, loaded the old rifle I had buried beneath the floorboards long ago. I wasn't ready to use it, not yet, but I needed it near. Not to kill. Just to remember I could fight if I had to. The baby began recognizing my face. He reached for me now, laughed when I smiled, played with my apron strings. It didn't feel like motherhood. It felt like redemption, like a wound slowly remembering how to heal. But healing has a cost. One morning, I found tracks by the well, heavy boots, 2 pairs, not Caleb's. The next day, the sheriff came again. This time with 2 other men I didn't know, faces unfamiliar, hands too smooth for farm work. He didn't ask to come in, just said, "There's been a complaint. Some folks are saying you're harboring someone who took a child that doesn't belong to him." I stared at him. "And who does the child belong to?" He looked away. "You know how these things go," he said. "There's talk. Some men from the city passed through, asking questions." My blood ran cold. Caleb was behind the window, still, silent, watching. I didn't move, didn't blink. "You can search the place," I said, "but you won't find anything you understand." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just be careful. We're not the only ones looking anymore." I waited until they were gone before I went inside. Caleb didn't speak. I didn't ask. Instead, I took the baby in my arms, held him close, and whispered a promise I hadn't made in years. "You're not leaving here unless it's with me." And I meant it. Even if it meant burning the orchard. Even if it meant facing them all alone. There's a certain kind of quiet that doesn't mean peace. It's the quiet before a verdict, before the knock at the door, before the sky splits with thunder or the ground gives way beneath your feet. It hums beneath your skin, steady and cold, and you start hearing it in every creak of the stairs, every wind that taps the windows like fingers made of ice. That was the quiet I lived in now. After the sheriff came, I began counting the hours by how often I checked the locks. The rifle was kept by the pantry now, hidden behind sacks of flour and dried beans. Caleb began placing small traps in the tall grass surrounding the barn, not to injure but to warn. We didn't say it aloud, but we both knew it wouldn't be long before someone tested our silence with more than stones or paint. The baby had started teething. He cried more now, small, wounded sounds that sliced through the tension like blades. It scared me how much I cared, how easily I had folded myself around him like a wall, a cloak, a promise. He had no name, not one we had spoken aloud. I had thought about giving him one, more than once, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear that naming him would make him more real, and more real meant more breakable. Or maybe it was respect. A strange kind of reverence, as if the name belonged to someone who hadn't arrived yet, a name that would grow into him in time. Caleb called him the boy, always gently, but always distantly. I knew why. Naming meant claiming, and claiming meant risk. But he had already claimed him, maybe not with words, but in the way I reached for him in the middle of the night, in the way I hummed old songs to ease his sleep, in the way I stood between him and the window every time a shadow moved beyond the porch. I had done this before. Once, long ago. A child who wasn't mine. A sister who had trusted me too much. A fever that came too fast. And a town that wanted someone to blame. I never held that sister again. They said I hadn't tried hard enough. That I had let the child die, that I hadn't run fast enough for help, hadn't shouted loud enough, hadn't prayed right. They didn't want my story. They wanted a villain. So I gave them silence. And they fed it until it became legend. That legend had kept me safe for years. No one knocked. No one lingered. No one dared ask what I did with my nights. But now that silence was cracking. And they were circling again. 2 nights after the sheriff's visit, I saw the first face. Not Evelyn Pike. Not her boy. Not Thomas Green. This man was older. Clean boots. Clean coat. A car idling on the dirt road behind him. Not a local. Not by the way he looked around like the trees were beneath him. He didn't approach the porch. Just stood near the fence, watching the house like he was waiting for it to speak. Caleb saw him too. He froze behind the curtain. The baby was in my arms, and I could feel his body tense like a wire pulled too tight. "Do you know him?" I asked. Caleb nodded once. A small, breathless nod. The kind that didn't come from recognition, but from memory. "He's not just looking," Caleb whispered. "He's collecting." I didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. The man stood there for 10 minutes. Then he got back in the car and drove away. No knock, no voice. Just the whine of tires over gravel and a trail of dust that hovered like smoke. Afterward, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and told me his story. Not the full one, he still held most of it behind his eyes, but enough. The child, he said, had been born into a home that didn't want softness. The mother had been sold, not married into a life where her body was a transaction. Her pregnancy was an accident, or maybe an investment, depending on who was telling it. When she died giving birth, the men who had kept her wanted the child. Not for love, but because his blood carried the right kind of name. "I took him before they could turn him into one of them," Caleb said. "Before they put him in those schools. Before they gave him that number." "What number?" I asked. He didn't answer, but the way he looked at the child told me enough. They hadn't just been chasing a runaway. They had been chasing property. The man at the fence wasn't searching. He was reclaiming. And we were trespassing on something they thought they owned. The town, meanwhile, had gone colder. The bakery no longer put bread out on the side shelves. The grocer stopped waving when I passed. Evelyn Pike's curtains, always half drawn, now stared openly into my field, watching, waiting, measuring how much longer they'd have to pretend I was invisible before I vanished for real. I didn't go into town anymore. Caleb offered to once, said he could wear a hat, keep his head down, pretend to be someone passing through, but I saw the panic in his shoulders even as he said it. He wasn't built for pretending anymore. So I went. Hood up. Eyes down. I didn't buy much, just salt, cloth, matches, and one thing I hadn't bought in decades. A silver locket. Cheap. Hollow. Just big enough to hide a picture inside. The shopkeeper didn't speak to me, just rang it up and slid the bag across the counter like I was contagious. On the walk home, I tucked the locket into my pocket and whispered a name to myself, a name I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't for me. It was for the boy. The name meant one who survives the flood. It came from my grandmother's tongue, old and wild and mostly lost now. I didn't tell Caleb. Not yet. That night, I held the child while he slept and traced the shape of the locket with my thumb. I thought about what it meant to name something, to protect it with more than arms, to bind it to a world that wanted to forget him. I would give him the name soon, when it was safe, if it ever was. The next day, the stranger returned. This time, he came alone. This time, he didn't stay at the fence. He walked up to the porch and knocked 3 times. Firm, polite, like someone who had knocked on thousands of doors before. I opened it. He smiled. Cold. Thin. Not unkind but practiced. "Ma'am," he said, "you're harboring someone that doesn't belong to you." I didn't answer. "You have a child inside. One that isn't yours, one that was taken from a legal estate. That's a crime in our books." Still, I said nothing. He adjusted his collar. "I'm not here to scare you. Just here to recover what was lost." He looked past me, toward the kitchen, as if he could see the crib through the walls. "He's not property," I said finally. The man tilted his head. "Everything is property if it's paid for." I closed the door in his face. That night, I buried the locket under the apple tree. Not because I changed my mind, but because I knew the name wouldn't keep him safe unless I was willing to fight for it. The day after the stranger came to my porch, the wind shifted. It didn't carry snow or ash or pollen. It carried something worse, certainty. The kind of certainty that belongs to men who believe ownership is a divine right. The kind that moves not with haste, but with patience, knowing it's already won the war before it fights the battle. I knew then what Caleb had been running from. Not fear, not guilt. Structure. He wasn't fleeing violence, at least not in the way most people understand it. He was fleeing a system, a machine built to brand people like cattle, to cradle them only if they complied, to erase them if they didn't. He had stolen something sacred from Thema child who might grow up outside their hands. That was the real crime. That was what they could never forgive. I spent the morning bottling honey. The act calmed me, reminded me that not all labor is punishment. The bees were quieter this season, but still alive. Like us, they clung to order in a world that wanted to shake them loose. Caleb didn't speak that day. He held the baby longer than usual, fed him without being asked, changed his swaddle with trembling hands. At one point, I saw him hold the boy to his forehead and whisper something into his skin. A prayer, maybe. A goodbye. He didn't ask. He already knew. He thought he would have to leave. Or worse, he thought they would take him. That night, I dreamed of my sister. Not the fever. Not the screams. I dreamed of her in the orchard, barefoot, laughing. She was holding her child, his cheeks full, his eyes like glass marbles. She looked at me and said nothing, but her face was peace. And when I reached for the baby, he was warm. When I woke, the sky outside was blacker than I'd ever seen it. No stars, no moon. Just wait. I stepped outside, barefoot like she had been, and walked to the edge of the porch. Smoke. Not fire, not yet, but smoke. The scent of something distant burning. I followed it to the edge of the orchard, and there, in the far field, just beyond the well, the fence had been torn down. Clean. Deliberate. The warning had been given. This was the answer to our defiance. I turned back toward the house and saw Caleb in the window, the child held close. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something that made my heart lurch. Surrender! I didn't sleep after that. I took the scythe down from its place and placed it beside the cot. I packed a small satchel blanket, flask, locket chain I had dug up again. I boiled 2 eggs, wrapped them in cloth, and pressed them into Caleb's hand. If they come, I said, don't talk, don't run. Just go to the orchard. There's a root hollow under the 3rd tree. It'll fit both of you. He opened his mouth to argue. I didn't let him. They won't come tonight, I said. But they'll come. And they did. 3 days later, I saw the black car again. This time, it didn't stop at the road. It drove down the dirt path, smooth and silent, until it rested beneath the largest tree on the edge of my property. The door opened. 2 men stepped out. The first was the one from before Thin Smile. Slick coat, city hands. The second was broader, younger, dressed in tan, like some twisted imitation of a sheriff. Both carried nothing but the air of men who had sent letters and now came to collect. I stood on the porch before they could knock. The thin one smiled again. You've had time, he said. I've had time to remember, I replied. To remember what? That this land doesn't belong to men like you. He laughed softly. Ma'am, everything belongs to someone, even a child. Caleb was behind the door, listening. I could feel his breath through the wood. He's not yours, I said. No, the man replied. But he isn't yours either. I gripped the railing. You think blood is the only way to earn a child? I asked. Then you've never raised one at 3 a.m. when they can't breathe. Never traded your food for their medicine. Never chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. The larger man stepped forward. Look, he said. This doesn't need to get messy. We'll take the boy. You can walk back inside and forget this. I've forgotten too many things, I said. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I stepped off the porch. I don't know what they expected, a shotgun maybe, or screaming, but I moved slowly, calmly. I didn't reach for the scythe, didn't threaten, just stepped into the grass between us and stood my ground like a mother wolf who'd buried enough of her own and wasn't ready to do it again. I will not give him to you, I said. The thin one sighed. You're making this very difficult. No, I said. You already did that when you started treating children like dead. He stepped forward. I'm going to count to 3. That was when the shot rang out. Not from my rifle. From behind them. From Caleb. He had stepped out the back. The old shotgun I kept behind the barn slung across his arms like a warning. His hands were shaking, but his aim was steady. One more step, he said, voice cold, and I swear I'll let the boy grow up in prison visits if I have to. The men turned slowly. You wouldn't shoot in front of the child. Caleb said nothing, but he didn't lower the gun. I felt the wind shift again. This time it carried fear, not ours. Theirs. They weren't used to resistance. They weren't used to people who had nothing left to lose. The thin man raised his hands. This isn't over, he said. It never is, I replied. They backed away, got in the car, drove off. I didn't exhale until the engine disappeared beyond the orchard. That night, we didn't speak. We just sat by the fire, the baby asleep between us, and listened to the wind in the eaves. When Caleb finally broke the silence, his voice was hoarse. They'll come back. With warrants, with lies, with others. I know. And next time, I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. But I looked down at the child, the boy, who now had a name, buried in the soil beneath the apple tree, and I made a decision I had been avoiding for weeks. We won't be here when they do. Caleb looked up. What do you mean? I mean it's time for them to be the ones who wonder where we are. The day we decided to leave, the air was brittle with cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that makes your fingers numb or your breath visible in sharp puffs. It was the kind of cold that settles deep in your chest, where hope usually breathes. The kind of cold that arrives not with a storm, but with the quiet knowledge that things will never be the same again. Caleb woke early, carrying the child like a shield. I found him standing by the window, looking out toward the horizon as if he could will the town to stay behind them. "We can't wait any longer," he said quietly, almost to himself. I nodded. I had known it for days, but saying it aloud made it real. We had lived through silence and whispers, through broken windows and threats painted in red, through men in cars and guns held like promises. Now it was time to make the silence loud to walk away before they broke us completely. The preparations were simple but heavy. We packed only what we could carry: blankets, dried meat, the locket buried beneath the apple tree, a small tin of honey, and the old rifle, loaded and wrapped in cloth. Caleb wrapped the child in a thick blanket, tying the edges securely. "Ready?" I asked. He hesitated. "As ready as we'll ever be." We stepped outside, the morning sun casting long shadows across the frost-covered grass. The orchard was still, save for the faint rustling of dead leaves caught in the wind. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting. The path to the edge of the property was narrow and tangled with roots. I led the way, the scythe hanging from my belt like a relic from another life. Caleb followed, careful not to trip, his grip firm on the baby. We didn't speak much. Words felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. As we reached the tree line, I paused. "This is where I buried him," I said softly. Caleb looked at me, confusion and sorrow mingling in his eyes. "My nephew," I explained. "My sister's son. I lost him here, and the town made sure I never forgot." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. "We can't let that happen again," Caleb said. "No. We won't." Beyond the trees, the road stretched out, winding and uncertain. It promised nothing but escape, and that was enough. The first hours were quiet, save for the baby's soft cries and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. We moved cautiously, knowing that every step away was also a step into the unknown. As the day wore on, the weight of the past pressed against us. Memories surfaced, faces we couldn't forget, voices we wished we could silence. Moments of love and loss tangled together like the branches overhead. I thought of the boy I had held in my arms, the fever that took him too soon, and the silence that followed. I thought of Caleb's haunted eyes and the secrets he carried. I thought of the child nestled against his chest, the fragile promise of a future we both feared might never come. By nightfall, we reached a small clearing near an abandoned cabin. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We built a fire, its warmth a thin barrier against the cold night. As the flames flickered, Caleb finally spoke. "Do you think they'll find us?" "I don't know," I replied. "But I know we can't live waiting for that moment." He nodded, exhaustion weighing down his features. The baby, lulled by the fire's glow, finally fell asleep. We sat in silence, two souls tethered by hope and fear. That night, I dreamed again of my sister, her laughter echoing through the orchard, her child's eyes shining with life. I woke with a start, clutching the locket in my hand. Tomorrow, we would keep walking. Because sometimes, survival isn't about fighting the world, it's about refusing to be broken by it. The morning after we left the cabin, the sky was heavy with a gray that seemed to press down on the world, muffling sounds and dulling colors. We had wrapped the baby tightly, though his small face peeked out, curious and unafraid, despite the chill in the air. Caleb carried him with a careful strength I hadn't seen before, like holding a fragile flame in the wind. It was a quiet kind of courage, the kind that didn't roar but simply refused to be extinguished. The road ahead was narrow and riddled with roots, stones, and the memories of those who had traveled it before us. Every step we took was a step away from what had been, from the orchard, from the house that had sheltered us and also threatened us, and a step toward an uncertain future. The forest closed in around us as we moved deeper into the wild, its silence almost sacred. It was as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, watching two fragile souls slip between their roots, hoping they would find a place to rest. As we walked, Caleb's eyes flicked constantly behind us. I knew what he was looking for. The inevitable pursuit, the men from the town who had long since turned from neighbors into hunters. I reached for the rifle slung at my side, feeling the cold metal against my palm. It was a reminder, a promise that we wouldn't give up without a fight. The baby stirred in Caleb's arms, wailing suddenly, breaking the stillness like a crack in glass. I stopped, pulling a small cloth from my pack, wiping the tears from his cheeks. "It's all right," I whispered. "We're safe here. For now." Caleb crouched beside me, his face etched with worry. "We can't keep running forever," he said. "No," I replied, "but we can't stay either." We moved on, the forest thickening as the afternoon waned. The light shifted, casting long, ominous shadows between the trees. Something about the way the branches creaked, the way the wind whispered through the leaves, set my nerves on edge. Then, just as dusk began to settle, we heard the distant hum of an engine. Caleb stiffened. "They found us," he said quietly. I scanned the trees, heart pounding. The sound grew louder, closer. A truck's headlights pierced the dimming light, a spotlight of impending danger. There was no time to hide. We sprinted, Caleb clutching the baby as I pulled the scythe from my belt. The underbrush tore at my legs, the cold air burned my lungs, but the fire of survival drove us forward. The truck roared past, its occupants shouting orders we couldn't quite make out. We ducked behind a fallen log, breathless and trembling. "They're getting closer," Caleb said. I nodded, eyes darting around for a way out. Suddenly, from the shadows, a figure emerged, not one of them, but a woman. Tall, with eyes like storm clouds, her presence both unexpected and vital. "Follow me," she hissed. Without hesitation, we scrambled after her, deeper into the forest, toward an old cabin hidden beneath a canopy of moss and vines. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. She introduced herself as Mara, a healer and protector for those the town wanted to forget. "You're not safe out there," she said. "But here, you might last a little longer." Caleb exchanged a glance with me, the weight of our journey suddenly heavier but somehow less alone. As the night wrapped around us, the baby slept in my arms, the first peace we'd felt in days. But outside, the world was still hunting, and we were still running. The night was thick with silence, yet it hummed with danger, an invisible weight pressing against the walls of the cabin, against the fragile barrier of safety Mara had created for us. Every shadow seemed alive, every breath a reminder of how close the past still chased us. I held the baby tighter than ever, feeling his heartbeat against my chest, steady, innocent, a fragile pulse of hope in a world bent on breaking us. Caleb sat opposite, eyes dark pools of fury and fear, the weight of his choices evident in the slump of his shoulders. Between us, Mara moved quietly, tending to herbs and quiet prayers whispered under her breath. Her presence was a balm, but even she knew it was temporary. "We don't have much time," Mara said finally, voice low and urgent. "They'll find us soon. The town won't stop until they take what they believe is theirs." I swallowed the rising panic, feeling the cold knot tighten in my stomach. "They think he's property," Caleb said, voice hoarse. "But he's not. He's more than that. He's everything we've been fighting to protect." I nodded, the memory of my sister's child surfacing like a ghost. A warning. "We need a plan," Mara said. "Running isn't enough anymore. We have to fight smart." I met Caleb's gaze, seeing the hard resolve flicker there. The man who had carried this child through the shadows, who had faced ghosts and guns, was ready. We would not run. Not this time. The next days blurred into preparation, gathering what little we had, setting traps around the perimeter, and forging alliances with others who had suffered under the town's silent tyranny. Mara's network was small but fierce, a secret web of protectors and survivors. I found myself transforming, shedding the years of silence and fear. The woman who had buried her grief beneath the orchard soil was now a shield, a voice, a force. We set a trap, one that would turn their cruelty back on them. On the night they came again, black cars and headlights slicing through the trees, we were ready. Caleb stood with the rifle, hands steady, eyes burning. Mara moved through the shadows like a whisper, setting fire to the dry brush in careful lines. I held the baby, my heart a drumbeat of defiance. The men approached, confident, cruel smiles etched into their faces. But they met a wall of flame, a symphony of crackling fire and desperate hope. Panic splintered their ranks as they scrambled, caught in the blaze we had summoned from the earth itself. I saw fear in their eyes, real, raw fear. The town's silence was broken. After the fire, silence settled again, but different this time. We had won a battle, yes, but the war was far from over. We packed what remained, eyes burning with exhaustion and purpose. As dawn broke, I whispered the name I had buried with the locket beneath the apple tree. A name that meant survival. A name that meant promise. Because in the end, this was not just about running or fighting. It was about reclaiming. Reclaiming life, love, and the right to exist beyond the shadows of those who tried to erase us. The dawn came not with fanfare or forgiveness, but with quiet grace, the kind of grace that settles over broken things and gives them permission to heal. The sky was painted in soft hues of rose and gold, light spilling across the remnants of the fire that had scorched the forest's edge. A fierce scar on the land, but also a promise of rebirth. I stood on the threshold of what we had lost and what we had fought to save. Caleb held the baby close, his eyes shadowed but steady. The child, wrapped in a worn blanket, stirred in his arms a new life that had survived the worst of the world and was ready to claim the best it could offer. We were still far from safety, still hunted by ghosts and those who refused to see the humanity in what they chased. But in that moment, there was something raw and undeniable between us. A future carved from the ashes, a vow written not in blood but in unwavering love. The orchard, the barn, the silent town that had turned its back on use, all of it was behind us now. Our path stretched forward into wild forests and open skies, into places where names didn't matter and where we could finally be more than what others had decreed. I reached down and took the baby's tiny hand. His fingers curled around mine, fragile but fierce. "Your name is not theirs to give," I whispered. "Your name is yours." Caleb stepped beside me, his voice low but certain. "We are more than their rules, more than their fear. We are the ones who decide what comes next." For the first time in years, I felt a lightness within me. The burden of past sorrows hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a chain but a foundation, something strong enough to build from. We began to walk, each step a rebellion against erasure, against silence, against the cruelty that had shadowed us. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was ours to choose. In the days that followed, we found allies in unexpected plus others who had fled, who had hidden, who had refused to disappear. Together we built a fragile community, one rooted in empathy, protection, and the fierce refusal to be forgotten. The baby grew, his laughter breaking the silence like sunlight through storm clouds. His presence was a beacon not just for us, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Our story became one of survival, yes, but more than that, it became a testament to resilience, to the power of love to reclaim even the most broken spaces. And though the past still whispered, we learned to listen without fear, to carry it with us as a map rather than a cage. If you follow this journey, know this: no matter how dark the night, how heavy the silence, there is always a dawn waiting to break. There is always a name worth fighting for, and there is always a path forward, even if it means walking it barefoot through the ashes. Now it's your turn. What are you holding on to that the world says you can't keep? What flame inside you refuses to die? Stand with me in this story. Share your own name, your own truth, your own fight. Because every story needs a voice, and this is ours. If you were in their shoes, would you have fought the same fight? We'd love to hear your thoughts, share your opinion in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like the video. Explore the other stories waiting for you on the screen.